I was doing well and everyone liked what I was doing. And my dad, God love him, pulled me aside and put his arm around my shoulder and said, you know, happiness is the goal.
Welcome back to Conversations That Grow, where we explore how the right conversations can shape our business, leadership, and even how we see the world. I'm Sada Fainin, and today I'm speaking with Chris Vaughan. Chris is the Chief Strategy Officer at Sequence Consulting, and with over 24 years of experience, Chris helps nonprofit associations unlock transformational growth and lasting change by rethinking their membership and revenue strategies. Chris, welcome. It's great to have you.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Chris, let's start with my usual question. What's a conversation you've had that changed how you think about business, leadership, or growth?
Yeah, the conversation that comes to mind, and I think about it often, is a conversation that I had with my father.
Okay.
Early in my career, when I started, things really took off for me very, very quickly, right? I got into the consulting world. I started in philosophy. That's probably a whole nother story, right? I wanted to be a professor, and I was for about 10 minutes, and then I realized that was not the most lucrative life choice I could have made. And I found myself in the consulting world, and I was doing really well, right? I was getting promoted really quickly, and I was making more money, and they were sending me all over the world, and I was into all these exciting things, and that was pretty much all I was doing, right? Was, working and traveling and striving, right? And sort of, and growing. And I thought I was doing the right thing, right? I thought I was doing what I was supposed to do. I was doing well and everyone liked what I was doing. And my dad, God love him, pulled me aside and put his arm around my shoulder and said, you know, happiness is the goal, right? Happiness is the goal. And I wasn't sure what he meant by that. And I kind of thought I was in trouble, like maybe I had done something wrong, I thought I was doing the right things. I'm hitting all the right buttons. I'm hitting the ball out of the park. And I don't think I was in trouble, but I do think he was concerned. I think he was really worried that I was pursuing the wrong things. I was focused on the wrong things, that I was spending my time on the wrong things, that I was after the wrong things. And I think it really, really concerned him. And he had come to that insight, I think, the hard way, right, in his own life. He was I started to live as a stockbroker, in life, where he was on the phone all day, Wolf of Wall Street, right, dialing for dollars, trying to make the money and striving. And I think he had a point in his life where he really hit the wall, right? And I think, as successful as he had been, and he was very successful, and he had a family, but really wasn't happy, and wasn't happy in his life, and I think had some real conflicts in what his business required of him. I think the people he was with weren't always the most ethical. I think the business he was in was not, the most principled business in the world. And I think he really struggled with that inside, and, not who he was. And at one point he, I don't want to say he broke down, but I think that's what happened ultimately. And I think he did a lot of soul searching. And at the end of it, he came out and he quit. He quit that business completely. He said he was just tired of, working for liars and thieves, and went into business for himself, and almost went out of business, I think, more than once. Honestly, when I was a kid, I didn't really know. I found out much later. But because he decided that happiness was the goal, right? It wasn't about money or anything else. And so when I recovered from the sidebar, right, with my father, I kind of really took that to heart, and I'm like, well, what am I doing? Why am I really doing this? Everything I'm doing for other people, right? I'm achieving all of their goals and none of my own, in the end of the day. And they're paying me lots of money. But after a point, that doesn't matter all that much. What am I doing? I'm on the road 5 days a week, and don't even know what I'm doing. And so I had the same kind of epiphany, honestly, with him at that point. Not long after that, I met my wife, and I got married. She and I worked for the same firm, and she was in the same place.
Yeah.
She was very successful, and she'd come from a completely different world and entered the consulting world and took off, and we suddenly we woke up and we were senior executives. Like, how does that
Oh, wow.
happen?
Yeah.
But neither of us were loving life. Neither of us were really loving it. And I took Dad's advice to heart, and we quit. We quit our jobs at this big consulting firm. We started our own company, which is Sequence Consulting, and focused on nonprofits. And as I thought about your question and like what was the seminal conversation for me in my life, I think it was Dad, and giving me not just permission, but I think kind of a command, honestly, to think about what happiness really would be for us. And for us, it was not just about the money. Yeah, we wanted to be successful and we wanted to have a good life and our own kids, but it was about, for us, it was really about doing something meaningful, right? Yeah. We wanted to wake up in the morning and do something we felt like was making a difference, and go to bed at night feeling like we'd done good things for good people. And that's what our business has been about for the last 25 years. And I find myself maybe turning into my dad, but giving that same advice to other people all the time. It's like, look, happiness is the goal, right? It's not the striving. It's not making other people happy. It's not hitting the artificial goal or the next milestone. It's what are the decisions that are going to make you happy? What are the decisions going to make other people happy? And then really thinking about what happiness means and what happiness means for you. And maybe that's the philosopher in me, right? Maybe he's not dead yet, right? But I mean, it really was sort of transformational. And I think every time I have a chance to have that conversation, it's transformational for other people too. And it sounds so simple, right? But I think it's really very profound. Right? What are we really pursuing in life? And when we do have those choices, what does it really mean for us to be happy? And what would it mean for us to choose that, right? Rather than something else.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It sounds like your dad was trying to save you from the heartache and the pain that he had, and he knew where you were, or he could see where you were heading, and wanted to stop you before it got too late.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. Yeah. When I hang up with you, I call him and thank him again, I guess.
Yes, do that. Absolutely. Definitely. And it's so great when dads, moms can speak into our lives and we can respond to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. As you were talking, I had all these questions come to mind, so I've written them down. But my first one was, how old were you when he said that?
I was 27 or
okay.
28. I was just a couple years out of graduate school, and sort of, it was like through the looking glass or something. I found I'd been in academia all these years, right, where nothing really ever happens. There's nothing exciting ever happens. And I found myself in this corporate world, right, and the company had just gone public and the internet was new and all this kind of crazy stuff was happening. And I was really into it, right? I was really overtaken, I think. And I do think Dad was worried about that. I think he sort of saw where it was going. That I was sort of chasing someone else's rabbit, for lack of a better term. And he just didn't want that for me, He just didn't want that for me.
Yeah. It's also, actually, I really like his approach. His words were few, but they carried a lot of weight. And I guess when you're 27 years old, you don't want to necessarily be told what to do, but you want the guidance. And it sounds like that's what he did for you.
Yeah, you absolutely do not want to be told what to do. And I didn't want to be taken down because I was flying high, right? I was feeling pretty good about myself. I was successful, and I was, climbing the ladder, and I was making lots of money, and I thought that's what it was all about. And I guess you're right. He sort of did it in a very indirect way, but the message really struck home, because here we are 30 years later, and I'm still telling the story.
No, that's fantastic. And was it a bit of a slow realization, what he was saying? Did it take some time for you to process, to really understand the weight of it?
That's a good question. I think it did. I think my reaction was like, what is he talking about? Like, of course I'm happy, right? Look at everything that I'm doing. And I think
look at what I've achieved.
Yeah, look at what I've achieved. Look at what I've got. Look at what I got. I bought a new car. I did think it took a while for it to really sink in. And to be honest, I think about it all the time. I mean, it comes back to me, again and again, when you hit those junctures in your life, you hit those crisis points, you hit those decision points, things happen. And sometimes I hear his voice again, like, but happiness is the goal, right? Yeah. We can go left or right. happiness is really the goal. And I find in my life, that actually gives me courage, right? It gives me courage to make risky decisions that seem risky, like walking away from my big job, right? Or, turning away a big piece of business that's going to take us away from, our principles and values and the things that are important to us. It seems risky. And I guess, 30 years of listening to Dad, that's not the risk, right?
Yeah.
The risk is really stepping away from the things that really, really do make you happy in a genuine and authentic kind of way.
I thought it was really insightful when you said that you realized you were achieving all the goals for your clients, but none of your own. And then you went on to talk about figuring out what does happiness mean for you. So what does that process, do you think, looks like? Because I guess some could argue that having a lot of money is what makes you happy.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people feel that way, and I definitely relate. And I like money. Don't get me wrong, I do.
Yeah.
But we've owned our own business for 25 years, and we've had a lot of ups and downs. We've had really, really good years, and we've had really, really bad years. Right? We've lived through recessions, and we lived through COVID, and we've lived through all sorts of things when times were really tough. And none of that had anything to do with our happiness, honestly. Right?
Yeah.
Stress, sure, right? I mean, when there's no money, there's problems, right? There's issues, there's things that you have to solve. But our happiness as a family, our happiness as a couple, our happiness as a business really had very little to do with that. Right? I'm sure if we lost our house, it's never come to that, but I'm sure we would be very unhappy. But within that realm, those aren't the things that we used to keep score. If keeping score is a valid thing to say. And that was a real realization too. I think, when you're young and striving and you're starting your own business, it's all about money, right? It's like, we need clients, we need business, and you do, but you realize it's not the checks at the end of the day that make you happy. It's the wins, right? Yeah. It's the, accomplishing what you set out to accomplish. It's realizing the vision for us or for our clients, right? It's like seeing that come true and knowing that we had something to do with that, right? It's like we made things better for someone else. We were able to engineer transformation for someone else or for an organization with thousands or tens of thousands of people. That is a happy feeling for us. And if we could do it for free, we would. We can't. So if any clients are listening, don't get the wrong idea.
Yeah.
But if we could do it for free, we really would. I think being able to detach from that sense of material happiness or using that as a scoreboard or as a scorecard is really been freeing, for us in our life, our business. Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like circumstances versus that happiness or that contentment, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right.
How did it shift your decisions and your approach to business then as you move forward?
Yeah, and that's a good question too. I think there's a world, especially when you're new, right, and you're sort of starting out in the new consulting business, where you would do almost anything, for money. Like anybody that got a client, any client at all, right? We're smart. We'll do smart things for money. That was sort of the business. And over the years, as we've matured, I think, and we've sort of leaned into it, we've become more choiceful about the things that we will and won't do, and more courageous about just saying no. To circumstances where we don't think we'll be successful, or we don't think what people are asking us for is the right answer, or it's people we're not comfortable working with. Yeah. Right? Our values just don't align with what they want to do, and that doesn't make them bad people, but it means they're not on our wavelength, right?
Yeah.
And having the courage to walk away when you're a small company, and you've got 2 kids in college, and it takes an awful lot, but to come back to that North Star, but what's really going to make us happy? How are we going to feel about this a year from now? Right? If we do this, or how are we going to feel about this, 2 years from now when we look back and we realize it wasn't what anyone thought it was going to be? you're happier saying no, honestly, in those
Yeah.
situations than taking the money. And it took a long time, honestly, to come to that. Maybe it's the early signs of old age and wisdom.
Yeah, I think there's that self-awareness as well, isn't it? The more you understand yourself and what you want out of life and what makes you happy, what makes you tick, then those kinds of decisions becomes easier.
I think that's right. And I do think some of that is the spoils of age
Yes,
and
absolutely.
and wisdom, right? And the battle scars and making bad decisions in your life to figure it out.
Yeah.
But it's very comforting, and I realized where Dad was coming from.
Yeah. No, I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, it's great that you still carry that lesson with you even now, and it's so evident that it's become a part of how you think and how you operate.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Chris, I'm fascinated by your philosophy background. How does that influence the way you work?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I sort of fell into philosophy completely by accident. I was a real problem child in high school. I was in trouble pretty much constantly in school, and my high school principal was at his wit's end. He had no idea what to do with me, and so he decided one day, as a punishment, he was going to force me to read philosophy. Right, so
Okay.
he gave me 3 books, and he forced me to read these philosophy books, and I had to write a paper and all that stuff. And I always feel like I won because I loved it. It's like I got the upper hand in this situation because I did it, and I really loved it, and I never let go of it. And when I went to college, that's what I wanted to do, and I did. I studied that in college, and when I was done with college, I feel like I was just getting started. Right, I was so fascinated with these big questions, right? I'd love to be in it. I'd love to be in the big question. I'd love to kind of wrestle with that and sort of struggle with, the meaning of life and what does it mean to be happy and all those questions. And I went to graduate school for philosophy. I went to Indiana University. I got my PhD, and my goal was to teach philosophy. I was going to be a professor in life, and I did teach there, and I did love it. But everything else about academia, I hated. I hated everything else but that. I couldn't do it, and it was not a good time to get a job in philosophy. Right, there was a paper called Jobs for Philosophers, and it was basically a blank sheet of paper. I mean, there were no jobs for philosophers, so hence consulting.
Yeah.
And people ask me all the time, well, what does philosophy have to do with management consulting? And like everything, right? It has absolutely everything to do with it. And it's difficult to explain. I think it's AI actually helps explain it. And bear with me for 1 minute.
Yeah.
Right?
Go for it.
So, it's about pattern recognition, right? That's how we learn, right? That's how AI learns. You turn it loose on these large language models, and it sort of learns patterns and how to look at things and think of things and then fit things into I think that's how we all learn about things, right? We all learn, patterns. And I think the same thing is true in school. So if you study philosophy, the patterns that you learn are from the greatest thinkers in history, right? Who wrestle with the biggest questions in human life. I mean, that's sort of that's your large language model that you're sort of learning to think about. You're learning how to think from studying these people. Those are the patterns that you learn and that you get into your mind. And when you do it for as long as you have to do, when you learn a PhD, they really just become part of you and become part of how you think. How to deal with really complex questions, how to hold a lot of different variables in your head, how to sift through all that and find the one thing that's true. Right, how to string all that together in a way that makes sense, and that you can talk to people about. So I bring that to my work, right? I bring that experience and those patterns to the work that I do with management and associations, and I think that's really unique. There's not a lot of philosophers in the world, for better or worse. There's certainly not a philosophers in the space that I'm in. And I think it gives me a really unique perspective. I think it's a different way of seeing things. It's a different way of solving problems that can be super duper valuable, right? I will look at problems differently than someone who went to business school, which is not better or worse. necessarily, but it's certainly different. So if you come to me, if you come to us, you're going to get a different answer than you might if someone else. I think the other thing that studying philosophy for all those years, does is it gives you a different sense of value, right? Of what the right answer means, and maybe it comes back to sort of dad at some point, right? But the right answer isn't just sort of solving the equation. The right answer has to be the right thing. So what's right for the organization? What's authentic to them, right? What's authentic to who they really are, who they want to be as an organization. And for us, is very much part of the solution set of what we do. And again, I think that's different. I don't think that people get that from a lot of other consultants. We don't advertise that. It's not on our website anywhere. Maybe it should be. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think certainly in the practice of our work, in the way that we look at problems, the way that we manage clients, there's something very philosophical about it.
That's really fascinating. So how do you approach problems differently than others? Like I know you've touched on it, but what does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question too. We take a very systemic look at this, right? It's not about solving the problem that's right in front of us. It's about looking at the whole system of how the business works. And again, maybe there's something very philosophical about that, right? It's like, if you do philosophy right, if you can imagine such a thing, right? All the pieces fit, right? They all work. Everything has to hang together. That's what makes it hard, right? Is, you're talking about complicated things. You're talking about some of the biggest problems in human life, but you want to do it in a way that all the pieces fit and connect together.
Yeah.
And that's how we look at problems. So if we come to an organization or an association, which is the people that we look at, the end result is we want all the pieces to fit. Right? We want it all to hang together, right? Like a really good story, right? Or a really beautiful painting. Like every piece fits perfectly, not just the thing that hurts today, right? Or the problem that's in front of us, today, but and not even why we got to that problem necessarily, but what is it about the whole system that needs to be better? What needs to change to make it click, right? To make the argument work, if you will, is very much part of our approach. And the feedback that we get from our clients is they really appreciate that approach, right? We're not, just trying to solve one thing. We're trying to make the whole organization better.
Yeah.
And we want it to stay better and continue getting better long after we leave. I think that's, at least they tell us, that's a very different approach.
Yeah, it sounds very intentional, purposeful.
Absolutely.
Rather than patching up, one little problem here, you're looking at the bigger picture.
Yeah, yes, and it's an inquiry, right? It's asking the question. It is very intentional for sure. Bringing it out, and it's very creative in a certain way, right? It's not. I think a lot of consultants and not looking to anyone, but sort of have a method, right? A sort of system or recipe, like, well, let's do this, and we're going to go through these steps, and you're going to get this at the end. And for some people, that's the right thing. For our clients, it's not. Right? The answer is not that obvious. It's not. There's no system that you could go through. There's no boxes that you can check off. It's a very creative process of really understanding them and understanding their members and their mission and how do you need to move the pieces around to help them become the kind of organization that they want to be. Sometimes we say it's a lot less like engineering than therapy, quite frankly.
The other thing you said, so one was problem solving. The other one was a different sense of value that you offer.
Yeah.
So what is right? What is right for them? What does that process look like?
Yeah, and not right and wrong in the sense of sort of morally right or wrong. I don't think any of our clients are wrong in that sense. That's why we work with the clients we do. I think it's right in the sense of being authentic.
Yes.
Right. To them. What is the mission really, right? Why are they really here? As an organization, why are they really here? And we work with clients that have been here for 150 years, doing what they're doing. But okay, but why are you still here, right? Why are you here now, today? What are you trying to serve? What are your members trying to serve? And how can we help you do that more authentically and more realistically? I think that's And for a lot of folks, that's the key to success. It's what helps them make hard decisions. It's like, yes, we could do X, Y, and Z, but we're really here for this.
Yeah.
Right? Or this is what we're capable of doing. We really are built to do this other thing, and that's what we should do. And helping people come to that realization, right? Come to that insight. I think that's the therapy part of the business.
Yeah.
But that's really where the transformation comes from, is sort of, embracing, their own purpose, their own authentic sense of purpose, and being realistic about what they can actually accomplish. See, and I'm sounding very philosophical.
No, not at all. I think what I'm hearing you say is they're able to take ownership of that process then, aren't they?
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. And be internally driven, right, as an organization. I mean, it's difficult not to be driven by outside forces, right? It's difficult not to be kind of buffeted around, by the winds and waves of business. And in for-profit, that's more okay, right? Because you have to be responsive to the environment, you have to be responsive to your customers, and you have to be responsive to whatever is happening. In not-for-profit, less so, right? That's not your job, is, to be responsive. It's, your job is to stand for something. Is to stand for a principle, and you have to do that in a way that's sustainable. So of course you have to respond, but you can't let the outside drive you, right? You are there to change things outside, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
And not helping clients rediscover that. I think they know, right? They obviously know what their mission and their purpose is. Sometimes they don't know what that means in real life. Yeah,
just words, but how do you actually put them into practice? Yeah.
How do we play it out, and how are we effective about that? And why is what we did 20 years ago not working anymore?
Yeah.
And how can we re-energize what we're doing around the mission without losing sight of it?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Do you find that there's a common blind spot that you help your clients see?
That's really funny. And it may be true for a lot of other types of organizations, but our clients are associations, so they're all membership organizations. So ultimately, they exist by and for their members. The blind spot typically is they don't understand their members.
How interesting, yeah.
It's typically the blind spot. And I'm not, by no means do I mean they don't care. They care deeply. And a lot of times they think they really understand their members, but when we pull back the covers, they just don't. They don't really understand their members and where they're at. One anecdote that we like to tell, it's not an anecdote, it's just a fact, right? It's on our checklist. We've worked with hundreds of associations over the years, and we join every single one of them. We are members of more organizations than I can even remember to count. My inbox is a mess. But our clients don't join their own organizations. They don't join. So they have no idea, honestly, what their member experience is. They have no idea. They don't know what it feels like to join. They don't know what it feels like to be a member. They don't know what it feels like at renewal time. They have no idea. And when we join and we show them what the experience is like, sometimes they're horrified. They're like, "You've got to be kidding me. We're emailing people 9 times a day." I'm like, "At least, sometimes more." They have no idea that they're doing that. So that it's, the blind spot is not just the members, it's themselves in relation to the members is a huge blind spot. And we kind of laugh about it now because it's predictable.
Yeah. We
ask us like, "Hey, has anyone here ever joined?" No. As part of the organization. And of course we always encourage them to do that, but it's, I wish I knew why that was, that it's not more obvious to people that they kind of need to be on that side, right? To understand your member, you need to be a member. That seems clear to us. It's like, if you didn't shop at your own store, or you didn't eat at your own restaurant, or you didn't, watch your own podcast, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, people don't know.
How interesting. What is usually the biggest resistance to change for them?
In these organizations, yes. They're really old, most of them, for sure. A 50-year-old association would be young. That's a startup. That's a startup in our world. There are some newer than that, but there's really not very many. And the biggest barrier to change is this is the way we've always done it. I mean, honestly, but we've always done it this way. It's impossible. It's unthinkable. We couldn't possibly think of doing something a different way.
Yeah.
And a lot of that's safety, right? There's sort of safety and change, and very, very risk averse as organizations. They're very member driven, right? So they're really, really hesitant to piss their members off. Or do anything that are going to make the members unhappy.
Yeah.
Even if it would actually make the members happy, but they're not sure, right? Well, maybe it will, maybe it won't. Let's not do that.
So just not go there.
Let's not go there.
Yeah.
I think there's for-profit companies that are like that, but for-profit companies are driven, right? They're driven by profit motives. They're driven by those things. These organizations really aren't, right? As long as things are copacetic, and members are generally happy, right? They're not storming the building with torches and pitchforks, then everything is fine.
Yeah.
So creating the case for change in this organization to do things that are uncomfortable and risky can be really, really difficult. I think that's the barrier.
Yeah, it's actually interesting listening to you talk about this, because I think going back to what you were saying before about your two approaches of problem solving and helping them understand the different sense of value that you talked about. I think I can see how that would work so much better with the associations that you're working with that are so much older, like your 50-year-old startup that you talked about. But I understand when you've been in it for so long that you need a different approach.
Yeah.
You can't just come and tear stuff away.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're very inward focused. And again, this is probably true for a lot of for-profit companies too, but they spend their entire day, right, thinking about their members, and their issues and their problems, and they don't turn outward much. They don't look at other organizations and what they're doing. They don't look outside of the not-for-profit world almost ever. So they don't have perspective on what's possible, and what could work and what could be better. And a lot of what we bring to our clients is that external perspective, right? Part of our process is, let's look at other organizations. Let's look at some best practices here, right? Let's, look at some comparable organizations. What are they doing? And it's always one of the light bulb moments of our engagement with clients is they're like, wow, really? That works? Or someone else is doing that? Or why didn't we think of that? I mean, there's always that component of it. And we love it so much, one, because the insight is fun, right? It's like, the gears get whirring, but it gives them courage. Yeah. Like, well, if it worked for them, it might work for us. I think maybe we can try this, and they start to get the courage, and you can sort of see the wins in their sails. I think it's just woven into the DNA of these organizations that they're so member and mission focused that they don't put their heads up very much, to look outside and see what's going on.
Yeah, and you're trying to help them grow without compromising their mission.
Absolutely, absolutely right, and that really is the key, because that's the bright red line, right, that one can't cross in these organizations. Is there about the mission, right? And I guess if my father pulled them aside and talked to him, he'd be like, the mission is the goal, right? The mission is the goal.
Yes. So how do you do that? I guess, is it different for each organization that you work with?
A little bit. It is a little bit different. We really encourage them to think hard about who their, not just their competitive set, but their comparable set. Like, well, who do you think is like you? What other organizations do you think are similar to you, right? Are there other organizations that you admire? Yeah. Gosh, I really wish we were like those guys. Who are those people? And then we encourage them to think about, well, okay, are there for-profit companies that you think you have something to learn from that do things the way you do? And that's often uncomfortable conversation. Like, well, I don't know, right? Like, I haven't really thought about that. But when you get into that conversation and you sort of choose the solution set of folks, okay, let's do the research on this group of people. The solution set's always different, but then the process is pretty much the same. I mean, we have a framework that we use to kind of surface the comparable best practices where we can compare A to B to C to them in a really consistent way that makes the differences and the possibilities really, really clear for them. And well, how do they talk about themselves? What's their model look like, right? What's their due structure look like? What do they offer that you don't, side by side? And then the opportunities and the gaps, honestly, just become crystal clear for the client. And often the direction comes into focus right away when you see like, oh gosh, okay, now we know we could do that too.
Yeah. Is there, has there ever been a situation where growth felt like it was threatening their core purpose?
That's a great question too. That's a great question too. Not growth per se. There's been many chances where what was required for growth felt like it was threatening their core purpose. And just as an example, there are some organizations that are focused on a very small core audience, right? Say a very small specialty, right, in science or engineering, that's not growing, right, or that's shrinking. So for them, the organization to grow, they have to think bigger, right? They have to look outside and, well, what are some adjacent audiences that we could bring into this, and how might we be able to do that? That would require us to not lose focus, but expand our focus away from this core group of people that we've existed to serve for 80 years. That seems really threatening. It's really threatening it can seem threatening to the members. Like, wait a minute, you're here for us, right? You're not here for these other people, in the space. I think those things can be, very threatening. If we kind of expand our aperture, are we going to lose our sense of purpose? Are we going to lose the loyalty of our members? Are we going to becoming a diluted version of ourselves? And the answer is no. You're going to be stronger as an organization, right? All those things are not going to happen, but those can be very fraught, I think, moments for folks when they have to, not lose mission, but when they have to expand it or redefine it, honestly. And sometimes that's what's required.
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes it's harder to see that when you're working in silo almost.
Yeah, we say that it's hard to read the label when you're sitting in the jar. Right?
Yes. Yes, I like that. Yes, exactly that.
That's right there. And that's why we're here, right? We'll tell you what's on the label. That's what we'll do. So.
Yeah. No, I love that. Can you recall a conversation where you've had with a client that served as a real turning point for them?
A conversation that we've had that served as a real turning point for them.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, we've had, actually not so long ago, we had a conversation with a very large medical society, very, very well-known organization, that knew they were struggling with membership. They knew it wasn't going well. They didn't know how badly it was actually going. Yeah. And we came in and we did our homework and we did our research, and we had a very painful conversation with them. Where we actually drew a chart of what their future looked like 5-10 years from now if things continued the way that they did. It's and we called it the "what if we do nothing" conversation, and we do that often. But in their cases, what if we did nothing? If we did nothing, they would be out of business in 10 years. They would shrink to the point where they were no longer financially sustainable, and they were going to shut the organization down. Wow. And this was a very prominent organization. It's a household name, and they've been around for a really, really long time, and they'd neglected it for so long that going out of business was a real possibility for them, honestly. Yeah. And they had no idea. I mean, that was really, really news for them to have that. As you might imagine, that was a very awkward and uncomfortable conversation, but necessary. It was really necessary to have that, to tell them the truth. And it was an absolute turning point in the project. They saw the urgency of what had to be done, and it really galvanized the leadership of the organization up to the board around the importance of doing this and the depth of change that was required. And it empowered the organization to make some of the changes that really needed to be made. And that client is one of our best success stories, right? They went from losing 8% of their members per year to flat in 6 months to growing by 8%, within a year. So a 16-point turn in membership within a year, which is astonishing growth, right, in an organization like this. But it all started with the realization that we're in trouble. Like, we're in real trouble here.
Wow. You just talked about, the painful conversation and facing hard truth sometimes. And I think it takes a lot of courage to do that when you're on the receiving end. So how do you help leaders build that courage?
There's another good question. There has to be a path, right? There has to be a path. But one, you have to be able to prove it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the data is really critical when you're having these kinds of conversations. I mean, it's easy for somebody to come in and say things are really bad, and you're like, they're not that bad, and to be able to say, yes, they are.
Yeah.
Right. We've really, really looked at it, and you have to take this through. I think that's part of it, is to be prepared and have the homework. But also there has to be a yes and, right? It's like, yes, things are really bad, and there's a way out, right? Yes, and here are the things that you can do, right? And there's hope, and I think that's part of the conversation. And that's part of our role, maybe back to the therapist again, right? Is, there's light, at the end of the tunnel, and you're not alone, and we're going to walk with you, and we're going to show you the way, and we're going to help you get there. But we have to agree that this is a difficult situation, right now. And we love our clients. And one of the reasons why we love our clients is they're generally up for that, right? I mean, we care as much about the organizations as they do, and they care a lot about the organization, and they're willing to do what it takes to preserve it and to save the mission. And it's one of the really gratifying things about what we do, is that, we get to see them make those changes.
Yeah, it's absolutely evident that you love your clients and what you do for them. That's definitely coming across.
Yeah, we do. We definitely, definitely do.
Chris, if you could leave listeners with one guiding principle for leading or growing with purpose, what would it be?
Leading or growing with purpose. Yes. I think happiness is the goal.
Love it.
I think, just to come full circle. And I think that what that means for an organization is the sense of wholeness, right? It's like the alignment. If we're aligned to the purpose, if we're aligned to the membership, it feels right in an organization. And we can tell right away, is an organization happy or not? And an organization that's on track, right? They understand their purpose. They know what it means. They know what it takes. Their members are with them and all that. They're happy places. There's energy, right? There's optimism. There's confidence. And they orient to that, right? They orient to what feels right. And unhappy organizations are the opposite, right? There's conflict, and there's confusion, right? And there's disarray and disorganization, and the members aren't with them. They're not aligned. I think it's not so different from people. It doesn't take you long when you meet someone to figure out if they're happy. I think you can tell, and I think organizations are the same. So as weird as it might seem to say that an organization is happy, I do think that there's some truth to that. And I think good leaders, whether they talk about it that way or not, they know it, and they get it, and they orient to happiness as well. And my dad would be proud.
No, I absolutely agree. I think you only need to speak to someone for 5 minutes to know how happy the organization is.
Yeah, I think that's true.
What would you say as to how a leader can help create a happy organization?
I think this is the philosopher again, but I think it's the authenticity, honestly. It's honesty. We've worked with a lot of leaders of all types, right? Sort of good, bad, and indifferent. And what really strikes us about great leaders in these organizations is how real they are, right? Their authenticity. They're humble, yes, sort of absolutely. They're 100% committed to the mission, absolutely. But they're just real. They come across as very real. And people orient to that instantly, right? This is someone that I want to follow. You know what you're doing. You care about me. I trust you, right, as an organization. I think they're true to their own principles, I think. And I think that's what permeates the organization. And it's funny, we work with a lot of these clients for a really long time. And over time, they create the organization in their own image, honestly. The organization starts to sort of mirror them in their principles in a really, really good way. And we've seen transformational change happen, sort of driven not by force of personality, but by force of principle, I think. from the top down, that these are people of principle, these are people of strong values, and the organization follows them. Kind of almost completely. It's a beautiful thing, and sometimes we stand in awe of some of these leaders that are capable of leading that kind of change.
Yeah. Would you say, though, that can also surface if you have a leader that's not so great?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And they also create the organization in their own image, unfortunately.
Yes.
Who orient to the wrong thing, or who are not really genuine, who aren't 100% committed in their bones, to the mission and the principles of the organization. We can tell really quickly, I think, but I think the staff and members can too. I think it's transparent to people. I just do. Whether they're going to articulate it or not, you feel it, in your bones, that this person's not the real deal. They're not really, and they may be good managers, right? And they may be good at managing up, and they may be good on television or whatever, but they're not good leaders, right? They're really not the real deal. I think it happens both ways. It really does.
Yeah. Oh, this has been so good.
Yeah.
Chris, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate the chance.
No, it's my pleasure to have you. Really enjoyed listening to your story, your insights, and it's really clear that the work you do is not only strategic, but deeply meaningful as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
No, you're welcome. Before we wrap up, though, where can people connect with you or learn more about your work?
sequenceconsulting.com. Come to our website. You can learn more about us and our clients and the work we do, and some of the research and the insights that we've published over the years.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And to those listening, you'll find all the links and details for Chris in the description. And if you're someone who's been thinking about using conversations to grow your own business, maybe even through a podcast, but don't have time to handle all the moving parts, that's exactly what we help with at Pod Junction. You can find out more at podjunction.com or just reach out to me on LinkedIn. So that's it for today. Bye from Chris and from me, and I'll see you next time.